Warehouse, Senior Economist with Wells Fargo's Corporate Investment Bank, and today I'm joined by my colleague Michael Puglisi to talk about two major fiscal policy issues looming on the horizon. Mike, there's been a lot of attention over the summer about the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation working its way through Congress, but I think it's been lost in the discussion that the budget resolution is not the annual appropriations process. Can you walk us through where we are in terms of the timing and the funding of the government when the fiscal year ends in just a little over a month?
Yeah, you make a really good point, Sarah, and that's that when you're hearing these $3.5 trillion budget numbers thrown around having just passed the Senate, that can be a little bit misleading. And so that does not mean that what we've passed is a 2022 budget that funds the government for the remainder of the year. The budget resolution just means that they've set high-level targets for spending and revenues and deficits and those kinds of things over the next decade. It does not mean that they've gotten down to the nuts and bolts of actually appropriating money for the various government agencies that need it on an annual basis. So think national defense, think environmental protection, think federal law enforcement, all those different areas. And so we still need to take steps between now and September 30th to actually fund all those agencies and ensure that a government shutdown doesn't take place on the other side of September 30th.
So if we don't get a continuing resolution or the actual appropriations done, you're saying we could see another government shutdown soon?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when Congress comes back in mid-September, it can pretty quickly pass a continuing resolution that would fund the government for at least a few months, maybe even the entire fiscal year. But if they don't come back and pass that in the next 6 weeks or so, then we are facing the prospect of a government shutdown starting on October 1st.
Well, you'd think both parties would want to avoid that situation, but there's a major complicating factor, the debt ceiling. Can you explain what's going on with that right now?
Yeah, so I do think that there's some support to pass some type of funding vehicle to ensure there's not a shutdown, be it a continuing resolution or all of the appropriation bills that would combine them into something along those lines. But the debt ceiling is really the big challenge. Republicans so far have not shown any interest for the most part in allowing a debt ceiling increase or suspension to be attached to that continuing resolution or budget vehicle. They've instead called on Democrats to attach a debt ceiling increase to the budget resolution that passed the Senate a week or two ago and that's going through the House of Representatives right now. But the Democrats have taken a similar stance in that they're not interested in doing this on a partisan basis through their budget resolution. So the two sides are at an impasse right now, and that's creating some real challenges because if they're going to move together or not at all, you could end up in a situation where not only is the government shut down, but you have debt ceiling challenges not too far down the road.
Well, how would you handicap the odds of a shutdown at this point then?
Yeah, so when I think about the odds of a shutdown, one wouldn't surprise me too much. I think maybe a little bit less than 50-50. If there's any saving grace in this, it's that the hard deadline for the debt ceiling probably falls sometime at the beginning of November. That's when the government would really run up against that borrowing limit and face a do or die moment in terms of fulfilling all its obligations. So, it's possible, and I think it's maybe close to 50-50 that we do get some type of government shutdown at the start of October, but they would have the better part of that month before the debt ceiling would also become a binding deadline that would create some real challenges for the government.
Well, it's never a good thing to have a government shutdown, but it seems like the current timing could be particularly bad given all the uncertainty around the economy and the fact that monetary policy is at an inflection point right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So when you think back to the biggest debt ceiling dispute that we had in the past decade or so, it occurred in 2011, and you saw real harm done there. The S&P 500 declined almost 20%. Consumer confidence took a big dive. T-bill yield spiked. And so when you think to the period right now, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment related to the economic outlook over the near term, the big pickup in cases we've seen with the Delta variant. There's concerns about rolling over consumer confidence that we've seen more recently. And the Federal Reserve is staring down the barrel of having a very tough conversation about its tapering timeline over the next few months. And so this raises some big questions. Are they going to be willing to taper if the markets are in turmoil over a government shutdown and maybe a debt ceiling dispute? Again, not to say that that's guaranteed to happen, but it's certainly a risk. And when the government shuts down, it can sometimes prevent key economic data releases from coming out. And those are the releases that the Federal Reserve relies on to guide its monetary policy decisions. So this has the potential to certainly create some noise throughout the fall at what could be a really big and key inflection point, as you said, Sarah, in both monetary policy and the economy.
So is the shutdown the worst that could happen, or is there a real chance that the U.S. actually misses a debt payment?
Well, of course, anything's possible, Sarah, but while we've had government shutdowns in the past, we've not actually had the government miss a payment or default. And I think it's pretty unlikely that that'll happen this time. Usually, policymakers find a way to ensure that does not happen, and we don't have to breach the debt ceiling or face a default or fail to meet our obligations or anything along those lines. However, as I've already highlighted, sometimes the journey to that resolution can be quite challenging and quite noisy and can create issues in financial markets and the economy. So even though we may eventually get to a resolution, it could be a winding and tough road there. So all of this to say, there could be some challenges on the budget and debt ceiling front. And this comes in addition to the other policy areas you mentioned at the top, Sarah. Several $1 trillion in potentially new spending and tax increases over the next decade happening on a parallel track this fall. So certainly not a lot going on, and we'll be keeping our readers abreast over the next few months of all of these developments and what they mean to our economic outlook.
Well, thanks, Mike, for walking us through all that, and we do look forward to those updates. Thank you all for tuning in to our latest Economic Insights video.